Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the Digital Access Show. This week's slightly different. I want to go back to basics with digital accessibility and talk about why we should be implementing digital accessibility in the community. And to do that, I brought along a man, Thomas Trout, who owns a number of businesses in the disability sector, Disbranded being one of them, and Tommy, as I call him, will tell you a bit more. But it is really important to understand the why of digital accessibility and the impacts it can have. Tommy, thank you for being on the show.
The pleasure is all mine, Narelle Gaddy. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. Tommy, tell us a little bit about yourself. I met you at the wonderful Techability conference where you were the moderator.
Yeah, our double act was reminded people of Abbott and Costello, but we got there and we educated
Yes.
and inspired a few folks. But otherwise, I'm the last guy in the world that would have and should have started a business, let alone several. And here I am, failing upwards as ever. But
Yep.
my entire background is in community services, been working in it, one guise or another, since I was about 16 years old, and now shocked to say that was 21 years ago, being 37 and still going strong with passion for it. And at the moment, I spend most of my time between studying at university in a biomedical science pre-med program there, but also working in two businesses that I currently run. One is Disbranded, a creative agency for the disability sector on a mission to build iconic disability brands, and also Inclusive AF, which is an organization or business that supports the health and fitness, allied health and fitness industry or industries to become more inclusive. So we do things like education, consultancy, accessibility audits, etc., etc. And yeah, I play around with supporting different disability startups and any other mischief I can get into, really.
Awesome. So, Tommy, one of the things that when I first met you that really interested me, you were talking about the history of disability
Yes.
and why, from your point of view, that people need to understand the history of disability to understand what's happening now.
Yeah. So effectively what happened is after I left a company that I sold, WeFlex, a lot of people in the fitness industry were reaching out, and even the health industry, and they were like, "Oh, we'd love to have you to come in and talk to us about disability, disability inclusion, and disability accessibility." And what I found is that it was very difficult to kind of make sense of a lot of things that we know today without kind of harking back to historical precedent where people were coming from.
Yeah.
Um, and I would spend almost a third of my time talking about legislation from the 80s and 90s, institutionalization and all of that. And so me and my brother Jack, being on the spectrum, and both of us being quite nerdy history fans, we just decided to deep dive it and create a course out of it. So we made a course called A Brief History of Disability in Colonial Australia, where we really look at the treatment of and the systemic environment around people with disabilities from early settlers in colonial times. So, the first institutions that have ever invented, the original binary, where we broke people up in between lunatics and idiots. So, idiots being intellectual or learning disability, and lunatics being people with mental health um,
Yeah.
conditions. They were kind of just lumped in together, and they were also treated and housed together. And it was only in the 30s that they actually started breaking them out separately. So lunatics over here, idiots over there. And the history itself, I could talk for hours on, but it's deeply fascinating. But also, it really does start to color in some of the language that we use today. I mean, people use the word handicap for disability,
Yep.
and people were surprised to hear that term. One of the origins for that term is that most people with disability were beggars and had a cap in their hand, begging for money. There was
Oh
also,
my
even
God.
in Victorian England before settlement, they passed legislation to allow people with disabilities to live in stables to keep them out of the rain.
Really?
Yeah. And then, but they would beg during the day. That's what the term was: handicap, cap in hand.
Hang on here.
Yeah.
Now I'm getting really fascinated. So where did people with deafness, where did people with blindness, vision impairments, which camp did they fall into?
Traditionally, the way that we supported disability before any real institutional support was either your family were able to provide for you,
Yep.
but
Mhm.
don't think for a second you were really going to contribute anything meaningful to the house. You were kept away like a secret. One of the
Yep.
reasons why is because, religiously speaking, 19th century, if your child had a disability, many saw that as an omen from God that you were unlucky or cursed or forgotten by God. So there
Yeah.
was family shame if anyone was born with any disability. And if you could, you can look after them. If you didn't, you would give them over to the church to look after. So that's where all
Um,
charities are church-based and educational things are as well. And when you get a little bit further along, they would have institutional care. Some were ran by the government institutions, but also some were run by benevolent ladies societies in the mid 20th century. So in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, we had community groups that would, provide that type of support to people who were deaf, hard of hearing, or blind, low vision. But it was grim, and you yourself would not have been in control of your destiny at all.
scary.
Very. Um, and what's interesting is that we a lot of the care that would come about, people would leave their homes and enter into either public or private institutional care, but the quality of their care would almost plummet immediately because the second someone isn't caring for you in your home, but instead in a separate home, a very creepy dynamic emerges in a lot of people, especially if they believe that you are lesser than. You become a glorified pet that they have to look after, but also can neglect and abuse at will as well. So
Wow.
there's testimonials from politicians all throughout the 20th century talking about how it's basically a different kind of hell inside some of these homes. Absolute depravity in institutional care. And it was the work of a brilliant man named John Rorty,
Yep.
um, very much a man in a physical disability, but had full faculties. And
Mhm.
but he was a smart lad, but he wasn't even allowed to steer his own wheelchair without a attendant forcing him to do it for him. And he somehow managed to get his little manifesto out to the mainstream media, and he called it Captives of Care. Excellent name for a manifesto and a book.
Yep.
And the media started reporting on the abuses of institutional care on people with disabilities. And he became a real leader and advocate and spokesperson for it. And you saw a real tilt towards deinstitutionalization in the
Mhm.
sort of 50s and 60s. And he is a significantly big reason why. And what's sad is most people don't even know his name. Even people with disabilities
Yeah.
don't know his name. And he did an awful lot for them. So we want
Yeah.
to
And
pay homage and respect to characters like that who did amazing work for people.
And I've got to admit, I'd never heard of him until you
Yeah.
said the name and told me about him. And I've tried to do a bit of research. Just, it's fascinating. So when you look at that, and then you suddenly say, well, hang on, now we're bringing digital accessibility into it. What does digital accessibility give people with disability?
Yeah, so I guess linking the two themes together is that historically the world has not and was not built for people with disabilities, and the internet is no different from physical architecture, right? There's no
Yeah.
digital wheelchair ramp, so to speak, for people with disability to access the internet. And so what you've got is the internet was built and websites and everything was built a certain way without that in mind. And we're now trying to retroactively fit and make things work. But whilst that's easy to do, what isn't easy to do is to change the perspectives and opinions of people who do not value accessibility or see it either as a box that needs to be ticked, something that is too hard, or quote unquote, they're not my target market, so I'm not fussed. And that's sort of
Yeah.
where we're at, is trying to make the argument that there are a lot of reasons why you shouldn't bring digital accessibility into your business. And not all of them are charitable. Many of them are commercial business cases for inclusion.
What do you see as the biggest commercial reasons?
Well, so it's called the purple dollar. The purple dollar is
Mhm.
the collective spending power of people with disability. And
Yep.
globally, it's about $13 trillion. Um,
Wow.
yeah, that's the purple dollar.
Wow.
Yeah, wrap your head around that. And even in Australia, the NDIS it's ultimately net positive. It's a great thing. And it's a $36 billion scheme that supports over 600,000 Australians. Like, you can't tell me there's no business case to lock into that opportunity as well. But also 1/3 of every household in Australia has someone with a disability there. There are a lot more disabled consumers than most people appreciate. And so all you were doing is just opening up your doors to more people digitally. When more and more businesses are ran digitally, more shop fronts are digital, all you're doing is opening up your doors to them and making them feel welcome, and to feel included. And if you put effort into digital accessibility, it often shows. It's often quite deliberate. People know that you're doing it, and they are much more interested in checking out your wares and giving you their business if they can.
Mm. So what about on the other side for the person with disability themselves? What else does it does other than the commercial side? What else does it give a person with disability other than being able to read the information, obviously?
Oh, look, it's always good to what one of the great things about the NDIS scheme was that it was really adamant about it creating consumer forces in the disability sector and not the charity block funded model of take it or leave it. It was around you've got funding, you spend it how you see fit.
Yeah.
With limited controls, and that's endless debate around how much
Yeah.
control there should be. And, there's a freedom versus risk argument that'll always be made. But for
Yeah.
someone with a disability, though, if they are mindful enough to put accessibility into their digital presence, then they are
Mhm.
probably going to continue that line of thought throughout their services and products. So if they're catering to you in the marketing, they're hopefully catering to you in the execution or delivery of whatever it is you're purchasing. So it's a good look. It's does build trust, it builds hope, which is great. And yeah, hopefully it leads to a good customer experience.
I actually like the wording hope because I know for me it's that mental well-being, it's the emotional well-being, and leading on from that, you get that physical sense of well-being that you don't have to rely on someone else all the time. And all I can say is, like, even at the Tech Ability conference, and Brian Duff from Tech Ability and I were talking about it, the fact I couldn't get off the floor by myself because of the way the lift buttons were set up. I couldn't get myself a cuppa. Even when I was going to do the speech, I was very reliant on having you standing beside me to work the computers and things. Because even though I can work the computers, it was the setup, wasn't it? And the environment that we were working in that day.
Oh, and again, even new buildings like that,
Mm.
the accessibility standards around building is limited and it's very structural. It is building buildings themselves. So
Yeah,
it looks more at door frames and heights and widths and where things need to be laid out, but it doesn't regulate a lot of what is inside the building. It doesn't regulate screens and accessible technology like that, which is frustrating because you can have a really accessible entry into a building and then you're kind of right back to where you started, and it's like inaccessible again, which can be very frustrating.
yeah,
It's I'm always mindful about not telling people with disabilities, oh, just, make sure they know your needs and complain a lot. But I couldn't imagine having to do that every day my
yeah.
entire life. That would be soul destroying. So I'm empathetic, and all I can do is do my best to incorporate inclusivity and accessibility. But as a broader society, we are making improvement, sure, but have a long way to go.
So what do you think the next steps for society should be, for Australian society, for Australian business?
Look, I think what's great is that the NDIS has funded a lot more interest in meeting the needs of people with disabilities. So that's a good thing.
Mhm.
I think we can start to look at the accessibility standards in a building sense to relate to other facets within it. I think, as far as I'm concerned, stairs and elevators, they are health and safety, they're part of the health and safety apparatus and they should be incorporated into things that have to be fully accessible, for obvious reasons, because you don't want someone having to navigate 20 flights of stairs in a Sydney CBD skyscraper because the elevator doesn't know how to work it. It's a real safety issue. And for
Yeah,
you, if you had no way, and if you were on your own on the 20th floor and you couldn't operate the lift, the stairs aren't a feasible option for you to go down 20 flights of it, and so that's the issue. And I think what we need to do is, yeah, extend those. We need to look at better literacy around what the WCAG standards of digital
Yep.
accessibility is, because I think most people don't know what they are. No one knows what they stand for. And, there's we need to move beyond the tick box effectively. People with disability are not a checkbox, and they shouldn't be treated as such, or their needs shouldn't be treated as such.
What are some takeaways that you could give to anyone listening, the business, the
Uh,
NDIS provider?
so I immediately have not empathy, but I acknowledge and appreciate that it can be an incredibly overwhelming topic.
Mm.
And like any new thing you're learning, the first few steps of your learning journey is really a plummet off a cliff when you realize consciously how much you don't know and how much you've got to do and how much work there is ahead of you and how overwhelming it is, and how, in many ways, being able to meet the needs of every single person with a disability is borderline impossible when you think about how broad disability is, how broad the manifestations are. But also, let's not forget they're people too with their own preferences and personalities, and it can seem so overwhelming. I don't know where to start. I'm not getting sued right now, and I'm just going to keep kind of trying to sneak along the surface without getting any attention and kick that can down the road as much as possible. And my advice would be is to consider that whilst you could get away with that, and most businesses do, think of it more in the lens of opportunity. Because if no one's really tackling it, obviously the first few that really try and really care, there's potentially less competition with the purple dollar and that opportunity.
Mm.
And also, one thing I've learned, and one thing that I'm sure you'll be able to comment on this too, is often the what I hear a lot from different industries that I work in is they say, "Oh, we don't want to do the wrong thing. We don't want to get yelled at. We don't want to get sued. They're so political. The people with disabilities, they're so political. It's always this, it's always that." And one, if you learn the history, you understand why it's like that. But secondly, what I've learned is that the disability, at least my experience has been, if you are trying, you are upfront, you are transparent about what you're up to, what you've achieved, what you're not achieving, circular feedback, there's actually an awful lot of grace and mercy in the disability community for businesses trying to do the right thing. The where you run into headaches is one, saying I'm accessible when you're not. Like, you know, just because there's a wheelchair ramp in and out doesn't make you accessible. Or saying you're
Yeah.
accessible on a website they can't read or can barely read is not accessible either. And
Mm.
so it's not a binary accessibility. It's, there's no box you can tick that makes you perfectly accessible, nor is it a gradient because I can be very accessible to some people and very inaccessible to others. Even on my website, I can have a website that's very accessible for someone low vision, but not accessible for anyone who's deaf. And so, or less accessible for anyone who's deaf if it's video based. And so it's not a gradient either because being great at one and zero another, it doesn't equal 50 because you're 50 for
Mm.
neither. Instead, you got to think of it almost through like different badges, right? So,
Mhm.
okay, what are the needs of people who have vision? Work that out, solve that. Okay, great. Now that whole market is open to you. Those people are catered for, and tell them, look, we're trying our best to do that. Give us feedback, and then you pick the next one and you work on that,
Mm.
and you could sort of do it that way. And if you're transparent, open to feedback, people understand what you're trying to achieve, and if you're transparent about the fact that it's a steep learning curve for an able-bodied neurotypical person to figure out,
Mhm.
there's plenty of grace there to be found. But if you're just like, yeah, we're accessible when you're not, yeah, then you're going to face it, and so you should effectively.
What about for the person with disability? What takeaway can you give them?
Um, I think I think it's important that when we can and if we can, we reward or promote businesses that are digitally accessible. I think
Mm.
you want it because it does cost money. It can cost a lot of money, and it's not on you to pay for it, obviously, but
Mm.
if they have done it, if they've done a good job, or if you can tell that they're trying and they're making good progress, then, if you want to give them business, obviously do it, but try and promote it as well. I think it's important that we highlight, engage, and celebrate businesses that are digitally accessible and make that the new standard, the new expectation, and make sure also that other people can find them. Like,
Yeah.
because if you are promoting a business that's digitally accessible, someone who needs it might find it thanks to you and then be able to engage that as well. So I think that's a really big one. And, if you've got the energy, talk to them about what your needs are that aren't being met. But it's also, again, I wouldn't tell people with disability to do that all the time because that would be exhausting. And I don't know if I could, so why should I ask it?
Yeah, good point. Tommy, thank you. I think I'm still blown away by that amount of money, $13 trillion.
That's the purple
And like
dollar,
even the NDIS itself, what is it? 80 billion,
36
50
billion.
billion,
$36
$86
billion
billion dollars.
prorated
Yeah,
across prorated across 600,000 people.
yeah.
Obviously that's not pure funding, that's everything around it.
No.
But on
Mm,
top of that, we have about, if I'm making a business case for providers, you're looking
mm,
at potentially at the moment there's estimated to be about 160,000 providers in the
mm.
NDIS and 600,000 participants, which means that
Yeah.
it's 4 participants per provider averaged out. But that also means I don't know if there's a more saturated market in the country or the world than 4 customers per business
Okay.
in national business. And so if you want to access a lot of them, or if you want to have a competitive advantage, most NDS providers are not digitally accessible. And you can really make a statement by making yourself accessible to them.
That's it. Spot on, Tommy. Tommy, how can people stay in contact with you if they want to keep talking about the conversation or find out more about your companies and what you do?
Sure. So you're always more than welcome to reach out to me. I'm on most LinkedIn and Instagram at just Tommy Trout. There's not many of us. It's a,
No.
it's a good name in that regard. So
Yeah.
quite, Tommy Trout is actually the name of the singing fish from the wall.
Oh,
So
it is too. Oh
if
my
you
gosh.
Google me, you'll get a wall of singing fish, which I quite
Ah!
like a force field of smoke to keep me hidden. But on LinkedIn, feel free to reach out to me, Tommy Trout. 2 businesses
Yeah.
I just branded and also Inclusive AF. Feel free to engage with them
Yeah.
directly as well. And yeah, I can talk underwater about this stuff. I find it very interesting.
Thanks, Tommy. Thanks so much for your time. It's like everything, every time I talk to someone, I learn so much. And even the institutional aspects and the history of disability. It's fascinating stuff. So, look, if you like what we do, please like, share, subscribe, review, give us feedback, whether it's good or bad or ugly. It really is the more information we get, the more that we can, fine tune what we're doing and provide you with the information that you're after. So we'll see you next time on the Digital Access Show. Have a good week. Bye bye.